There are literally thousands of tips online about how to play chess better. But what does the 12th world champion have to say about it? As someone who achieved the title of international master, I literally grew up and learned from the games of chess legends and classics. And today, I'll highlight for you 3 of the most important lessons from Anatoly Karpov, all using just a single game as an example. Let's dive in. The year is 1979. Anatoly Karpov versus Jan Timman. Jan is a legend of Dutch chess. e4, d6. Karpov is playing white, the Perkufimtsev defense is on the board, and Karpov chooses a very interesting setup against this defense. I really liked it, and I think you might like it too. If you ever play against the Perkufimtsev defense, take a closer look at this setup for white. Karpov fianchettos his bishop to g2 and places his knight on e2 to support the d4 square. Jan Timman plays knight to a6. Here, more common moves are, for example, c6. The knight on a6 doesn't look that great. Sometimes they also play knight to c6. But the idea might be to bring the knight to c5 after taking on d4, to put pressure on the central pawn on e4. Karpov plays rook to e1 and black responds with c6. h3, the first lesson from Anatoly Karpov, prophylactic thinking. The idea behind this move is that white wants to prevent black's pieces from coming onto white's side of the board. In other words, white is preventing the bishop from coming out and possibly stopping some knight jump as well. Of course, it's important not to confuse prophylactic moves with wasting time, but in this case it's necessary. First of all, to keep the bishop out. Secondly, white wants to place the bishop on e3, and if the pawn weren't on h3, black could jump with the knight to exchange this bishop. Rook to e8 is played. Black is preparing to put pressure on white's central pawn on e4. Bishop to g5. Why does Karpov bring the bishop out to g5 right now? Not in order to create a pin. Usually the bishop is better placed on e3 here to support the pawn on d4. This is a provocation of black, because now, if they play a6 as in the game, white retreats the bishop to e3 and continues developing with tempo. That is, the move queen to d2 will come with an attack on the pawn at a6. Alternatively, besides the move a6, black could capture on d4, and then after knight takes d4, another provocation comes from black. The pawn advances to g5. Now retreating to e3 wouldn't be very good because knight to c5 would come with tempo and the pawn on e4 would be hanging. That's why the bishop immediately retreats to c1. The pawn on d6 is a target for attack and the f5 square is weak. Here white's position is more pleasant. In the game, a 6 was played, the bishop retreated to e3, and the queen went to c7. Probably not the most accurate move. Here, Jan Timman also needed to show his prophylactic thinking and ask himself, what does white want? And as I already told you, white wants to play queen to d2 with tempo in order to quickly develop. And here, the move king to h7 looked very interesting, to prevent the queen d2 move with tempo. After all, now if white continues in the same spirit, black gets the opportunity to create pressure on the e4 pawn and capture on d4 with the pawn. They take with the knight, knight to c5, the pawn on e4 is under attack, and after f3, black can play d5, immediately breaking through the center and finding active play. And the tactical blow knight to c6 attacking the queen doesn't work, and it seems like white is winning a knight, but black has a counter blow, an intermediate move on e4. And it turns out that in this position, black is actually more comfortable. The center opens up and they have full-fledged play. If you capture on d4 with the bishop, then knight to c5 follows. And usually in such positions, the move e5 looks very strong, aiming to undermine the pawn on d6 and leave the knight on c5 unprotected. But here it turns out that in fact the bishop will be pinned and this doesn't work. That's what the king move to h7 was for. Jan Timman didn't suspect this and played queen to c7. Karpov plays queen to d2, attacking a6, king to h7, rook to d1. All logical moves. Bishop to d7, g4. At this point, white now needs to overprotect this crucial square, which means assigning extra pieces to defend it, in order to create problems for black's play. By doing so, white makes it much more difficult for black to attack or undermine this important position on the board. Overprotection is a term introduced by Aaron Nimzowitsch. The essence of overprotection is to defend an important point in your position with a surplus, freeing your hands for operations on other parts of the board. Overprotection should only be applied to strong points, because overprotecting less important objects can lead to a passive placement of the defending pieces. That's exactly why the move g4 was played. The knight is heading to g3. And this is, in essence, a lesson combined with the first one, yes, with the move h3. This is also a form of prophylaxis against black's play. We don't allow the opponent to get counterplay. Rook to d8, knight to g3, bishop to c8, black is now opening up the rook. So now at some point it will be eyeing our queen. f4, the active play begins. The pawn on e4 is securely protected. The center on d4 as well. Now is the perfect time to try to find play on the king side. b5 is an attempt by black to find some chances on the queen side. I3 is another prophylactic move by Karpov, preventing the move b4 at some point, because after b4, black's pawn structure would be ruined. And it doesn't allow black to easily chase away the knight on c3, which is also helping to defend the e4 pawn. Black plays b4 anyway, trying to find at least some counterplay, maybe later to play a 5, bring the bishop out to a 6, but all of this of course looks far too slow. The knight retreats to a 2 again with tempo, directly attacking the knight on b4. They capture on d4, knight takes d4, and the knight from c3 moves right into the very center. You couldn't imagine a better position for it here. A 6, c3, and the knight retreats. And now lesson number 2. We further strengthen our position while gradually weakening the opponents. Queen to c2, making a strategic move. First of all, the queen moved out from under the rook. Possibly at some point the rook could have become active. Well, the position itself, the center could have opened up, and then the queen would have come under tactical blows. Plus, we've once again defended the pawn on e4. And now, the move knight to c5 comes without tempo for black, and they can't become active because the move knight to c5 runs into the strongest refutation, b4. And after the exchange, the queen is revealed and the pawn on c6 is lost. If you simply retreat the knight to a 6, then b5 looks extremely interesting here, completely breaking up black's pawn structure. Instead of the move knight to c5, bishop to d7 was played, the knight retreated to f3. Rook to a7, bishop to f2. Although the computer doesn't really like bishop to f2, just look at how harmoniously all of white's pieces are placed. It's simply a feast for the eyes. Such a harmonious arrangement of the pieces. Well, who else but Karpov could achieve this, right? It's just a pure pleasure to watch this game. Black's position is extremely difficult. Their pieces are scattered, and there's no sense of harmony in black's position. The bishop retreated to e8. And here comes lesson number 3. No matter how good your position is, you can't just move back and forth aimlessly. Sooner or later, you have to find the right moment to deliver a decisive blow to your opponent. You have to make use of your advantage. And Karpov plays queen to d3. Again, it's a move with tempo, taking advantage of the fact that the knight can no longer jump to c5, since the pawn on d6 is now pinned after the bishop left and the rook on d8 will be lost. So what should be done? The knight needs to be defended. Queen to b7. But if you play knight to b8, then a crushing e5 strike in the center follows. Knight to d5, e takes d, rook to e1, knight to e1, queen to d6, and c4. Once again, he's using pins. The queen moved to b7, rook to a1, bringing the rook into play along the a-file and starting to attack black's weaknesses. The pawn on b2 is untouchable for Jan Timman because white will play rook to b1 and the queen will be trapped. Knight to c7, rook to a5, simply capturing the extra pawn, and now it's time to convert the advantage. Before, knight to a6, bishop to a3, defending the pawn on f4. c5 is the last attempt to create at least some problems and try to generate counterplay. But here comes another strong move, f5, driving the knight to an awkward position on d8. e5, just look at this poor knight. Can't go to c6 or e6. Absolute domination from Anatoly Karpov. King h8, bishop f2, queen c7, rook f4, moving out from under attack. c4 is protected, just an extra healthy protected passed pawn. Plus black has weaknesses. And of course, here comes another crushing blow. e5, undermining the defense of the c-pawn, and after the exchanges, it is lost. And Jan Timman simply couldn't take it anymore. Realizing that white has 2 connected passed pawns and there's nothing he can do about it, he admitted defeat. A complete domination by Anatoly Karpov, and some of the most important lessons and tips for your own play, which I hope you will use in your games.